people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
News. Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap for what was the last crescendo. An excellent card from top to bottom that really delivered at an affordable price. Callum Smith and Joshua Buatsi kicked it off. This was for the WBO interim title at 175 pounds. I went with Callum Smith to win the fight, and I went with Callum to win it by way of knockout. Credit to Joshua Buatsi's durability. He showed more wherewithal than I expected him to, though all the same, Callum won. So very early in the fight, Callum Smith established himself as the busier, more aggressive fighter of the two, letting go of combinations and body shots, showing good power every single time. Callum Smith is a big puncher at 175. Taking it to Joshua Buatsi more often than not, that when you look back on this fight, your memory of it will likely be Callum was busier, and that's why he won. Hurting Joshua Buatsi 2-3 times by my count. He tried to match his output. Joshua Buatsi tried to stay with and stay on Callum Smith. It looks to me like they understood the assignment. They understood what bothers Callum Smith and what they have to do. Stay with him, stay close, and smother. But he couldn't execute. There are a lot of moments where these guys are head-to-head in the phone booth with each other, and Joshua Buatsi's just not doing enough. It's almost like he was waiting for his turn to throw some punches. Callum outworked him. So Joshua understood the assignment. He knew what he had to do, but he wasn't the guy to execute it. And that's what I said in the build-up of the fight. Close quarters fighters like John Ryder, Canelo, Beterbiev, these are the guys that bother a Callum Smith. The ones who crowd him, the ones who fluster him and overwhelm him with activity. And that's not really Joshua Buatsi. He's not a phone booth fighter. Though you could see in the fight, he tried to make that adjustment. He tried to be that fighter. It's just, that's not who he is. That's not his forte. He's not a phone booth fighter. Even though he showed great durability throughout the course of the fight, he doesn't have the work rate, the activity. I think Callum Smith's best punch throughout the course of the fight through the night was the slip right-hand counter. Slipping Joshua Buatsi's orthodox jab and countering with a big right hand. He did that several times throughout the course of the fight. Landed that punch several times. Hurt Joshua Buatsi several times. Slipping the jab and countering with his right. It was Callum Smith's best punch of the night. I want to say Joshua Buatsi's best punch of the night was a counter jab in the exchange. There were moments where Callum is being busy and coming on, and he'd get caught with a counter jab in between in the exchange that would stop him in his tracks and halt his momentum, albeit only momentarily, because throughout, Callum was the busier fighter in the fight, and that's what won him the fight. Being busy. Callum did fade down the stretch, though, towards the tail end of the fight. Having done most of the work, he was gassing out and losing his shape. Joshua Buatsi found a second wind, tried to come on, but by then, he was at a deficit. Too little and too late. Lost too many rounds. By the 11th and the 12th, Joshua Buatsi is playing catch-up. 7-5 Callum Smith is how I saw it. There's an argument for 8-4, but 7-5 Callum seems right to me. Ahead of the fight, I saw a lot of people going with Joshua Buatsi to win it. Didn't understand why when he's not the most experienced fighter of the two. Callum's been in there with much better fighters, much better quality of competition so far than Joshua Buatsi has. And Joshua, being a standout amateur, an Olympian, and a blue-chip prospect, as a professional, he has not achieved so much that he's head and shoulders above Callum. Quite the opposite. You would have expected more from someone with Joshua's amateur background by age 31. This was a significant step up in competition for him, but not for Callum, who's already been in there with George Groves and Canelo and Artur. So that by the time he fights with Joshua Buatsi, he's telling himself, well, you're not as good as them. This is nowhere near as difficult, nowhere near as hard as those fights were, the prediction stuck.
But credit to Joshua.
Because he did exceed my expectations in some areas. I wondered about this guy's wherewithal, his chin, whether or not he could hold a shot, and having been hurt several times throughout the course of this fight but never getting knocked down.
Showed a good chin.
I've wondered about his engine too, that if he's pushed, is he going to get worn out? And his engine held up. He kept his shape throughout the course of the fight.
Exceeded my expectations in that area as well.
But the prediction did stick. I figured that Callum's going to be too much for him. Callum should win.
And he did.
Now, he is in a pole position to challenge for an alphabet titles, once more in the light heavyweight division, and Joshua has to go back to the drawing board.
It was an excellent fight. Non-stop action from start to finish. I loved it.
The action continued as unbeaten Agit Kabayel took on Big Bang Zhang.
Prediction stuck.
I figured that Agit Kabayel's movement, work rate, his activity, and his variety of punches, particularly his body attack, will be too much for a 41-year-old Zhang.
It's what we saw.
In the opening stanza, it would seem that Agit Kabayel got off to a somewhat rocky start as Zhang was coming on and putting his power on display. That big left hand, that straight left hand, that backhand from out of the southpaw stance. Looked like Agit Kabayel was having trouble managing the distance at which the fight was being fought in the opening round, but by the second, he was moving and grooving.
Closing the distance and being busy, giving Zhang too much to have to respond to, flustering him deep in the pocket.
Noticeable height differential between them, and I say it all the time. For the smaller fighter with a lower center of gravity, the safest place is close to the bigger man.
Not outside and not mid-range.
Deep on the inside is where you want to be when there's a noticeable height differential, where it's easier for you to string your punches together and harder for the taller, longer fighter to get his arms out, because the taller, longer fighter needs more room to work. Agit Kabayel would not give Zhang that satisfaction, just staying with him and staying on him. Body shots, a concentrated attack to the body.
And when he tried to protect his body, Agit would go to the head, firing uppercuts right up the middle.
Making Zhang look every day and every week, every month, every year of 41 years old.
A moment of hope for Zhang in the 5th round as he connected with a big straight left hand, a counter left hand.
As Agit was coming on and staying in character, he connects with that punch that drops Agit Kabayel in the 5th, but he didn't appear to be worse for wear. His legs weren't jelly.
Not spaghetti.
He rises to his feet, gets back on the saddle, and gets back to doing what he was already doing, wearing out a very tired Zhang.
Gasping for air, trying to hang tough.
In the 6th, after a while, Zhang so exhausted, so spent, he couldn't even get his hands up to protect himself. Agit Kabayel, in the 6th round, paid back Zhang for the knockdown in the 5th, took him out.
Folded him up like a lawn chair.
This fight was for the WBC interim title. That essentially means that Agit Kabayel is in a pole position to either challenge for the full green and gold title or be elevated to full champion after Usyk retires, because it won't be long now. Usyk has made it clear he's only got 2 fights left in him, and he's going to fight Daniel Dubois to become a 2-time undisputed champion. But after that, if he wins and he retires,
the belts go vacant, and Agit Kabayel may be elevated to full champion. Joseph Parker may be elevated to full champion.
A glimpse of the future and what the lay of the land will be after that.
Agit Kabayel is on some run, I'm telling you. He's taking these bogeymen.
He's just wiping his ass with them, whether it's Frankie Sanchez or Arslanbek Makhmudov, now Zhilei Chang.
Made a splash, a big one. I picked him to win the fight. I picked him to wear out Zhang, and that's exactly what he did.
The prediction stuck, and congratulations to him. We then come to the junior middleweight contest between Virgil Ortiz and former champion Israel Madrimov, where the prediction didn't stick. Ahead of the fight, I presented 2 scenarios that if Virgil's going to win this thing, it'll be by outworking Israel Madrimov and appearing the busier fighter of the two. That's if Virgil wins. If Israel wins, it'll be by using Virgil's forward momentum and aggression against him to land hard counters. Whenever he opens up, you meet him at the door. Having seen the fight, we now know it's the former more than the latter. Virgil was just busier, more aggressive.
Effective.
From the aesthetic of the fight, what it reminded me of was when Prince Nassim Ahmed fought Marco Antonio Barrera. We all remember that Prince, he was a very fly and flashy guy, moving around, showboating and doing a lot of things. But that's no substitute for basic fundamentals, solid fundamentals.
Marco Antonio Barrera did not have all the bells and whistles that the Prince had, yet he beat him.
I think it was the same with Virgil, just staying tucked behind that high guard and consistently applying pressure. He was the more effective fighter of the two and the busier fighter of the two, whereas what we were getting from Israel was a lot of movement for the sake of movement, a lot of herky-jerkiness, but not a lot of scoring blows.
He just wasn't trying hard enough to land punches.
The reason for it, Virgil's forward momentum and aggression and his defense.
Israel couldn't find the right moment to let punches go.
That is, let punches go safely. Virgil's forward momentum rendered him flustered and intimidated to where all he could do was move. Try not to get pinned down.
In the first half.
In the second, things heated up a bit more in the second. Israel wasn't moving around as much and he was letting his hands go more, but I think by then he was at a deficit.
Down a few rounds.
Whereas what you got from Virgil was consistent throughout, consistently. He was the guy coming forward, he was the guy letting punches go, he was the busier fighter of the two within the round, and even though he was wearing Israel's handiwork on his face,
bruised and cut, bleeding,
still seemed the ring general to me, so this was one that I struck out on. I thought that Israel's herky-jerky movements and footwork might be enough to exploit Virgil's aggression, but that aggression seems to have disarmed Israel Madrimov.
Still a hard puncher. The power was there. He just didn't use it often enough. Power counts for nothing if you don't land, and you can't land if you don't throw.
Surmising Israel's approach to Virgil was movement for the sake of movement.
That's it.
8-4 Virgil Ortiz is how I saw it, but 8-4. Much better performance from his last one. He looked a lot better in this fight than he did with Sergei Bohachuk, but the Bohachuk fight was a very different fight from this one, where Sergei was willing to meet Virgil in the pocket and engage. Israel didn't, and that's the difference.
He didn't do that often enough.
Veteran content creator and professional suck-up Eli Sekbak said, Virgil hurt Madrimov way more than Crawford did.
Is that accurate?
Well, remember who it's coming from. It's coming from a guy who was backing Errol Spence Jr. to win, pissed off that he didn't.
He's still mad Terrence Crawford called him out for being biased and not knowing shit about boxing.
I don't necessarily agree with this professional bootlicker's evaluation of the fight, because the Crawford fight for Israel was a very different fight than the Ortiz fight. And even though Ortiz had some really good moments in this thing, it came at a cost. It came at the expense of getting hit more, because he did get hit a lot more than Terrence Crawford did when you compare those fights. And he was wearing Israel's handiwork on his face, that if you look at Crawford post-fight and you look at Ortiz post-fight, he's really marked up.
Terrence only had mild swelling post-fight, whereas Ortiz, he's really marked up. He's cut over the bridge of his nose, a slight cut over his left eye.
I suppose it all depends on what you classify as being better as an individual. Did Virgil really do better when he got hit more and he got cut more?
I wouldn't call that better.
Though still very good. Styles ultimately make fights, and I did say ahead of the fight that this ain't going to be a chess match like it was with Terrence Crawford. This is going to be more of an action fight, because Virgil's an action fighter. That's what he made it, and that's how he won.
Still on the cusp of fighting Sebastian Fundora for not one, but two of his alphabet titles, and we'll see if that comes into fruition or if Virgil decides to move up, because he did make some mention of moving up to middleweight ahead of this weekend's contest.
So I crapped out on this one. This is one prediction I got wrong. Congratulations to Virgil Ortiz.
There's more to recap, but we can't recap the whole card in this entire video, so we'll just move into the main event.
Talk about the other fights in another video. Let's talk about Dmitry Bivol's revenge win over Artur Beterbiev.
Newly crowned undisputed champion.
Another prediction I struck out on. No, I did not pick Dmitry Bivol to win this weekend's mega match, and he proved me wrong. I think he proved a lot of people wrong.
Yeah, I'm 0-2 with these guys. The last time I picked Dmitry to win, and this time I picked Artur, and I struck out both times.
And nobody's right 100% of the time. How did Dmitry Bivol do it? What is it that he changed? What is it that he did differently that saw him winning this fight where he lost the last one?
In the build-up of this weekend's fight, I often ask the question,
what adjustments is Dmitry going to make? What is he going to change? Because depending on what he changes, that could see him get knocked out.
I strayed far from the golden rule that rematches are often won by the fighter who can change, the fighter who can adapt, and that is Dmitry more than Artur. That I didn't expect anything new or anything different from Artur. If anybody's going to change something, it'll be Dmitry because he's the one that has to.
So, what did he change? What did he do differently?
It's nothing dramatic, I'll tell you that. His performance in the first fight and his performance in the second, they really ain't that different.
There's a difference. It's a marginal difference. And what it seems to me to be is a better balance of offense and defense. That's what he showed yesterday.
Not dramatically different.
Just a better balance of what he showed us in the first fight. Because in the first fight, I felt he's spending too much time moving, too much time circling away from Artur, needs to assert himself a bit more. And yesterday, he did do a better job of that.
Balancing his defense with his offense, his movement with his activity.
Though I will say, in the first half of the fight, where Artur's growing into it, it started to look bad for Dmitry. It started to look like Artur might knock him out this time.
That's in the first half. Dmitry really grows into the fight in the second.
These subtle differences, marginal differences, which really aren't differences at all, it's sort of like moving your money around.
Reallocating your finances, your resources.
To achieve a better budget, in this instance, a better balance for Dmitry. So you will remember that after the first one, there were a lot of people that felt Dmitry did enough to have won a decision. He just didn't get it. And that means that going into this one, he didn't have to change very much.
I had it 7-5 for Artur in the first one, 7-5 for Dmitry yesterday.
Yesterday's fight was not dramatically different from their initial meeting. The aesthetic was about the same. Very close, very tight, good moments from Artur, some good moments from Dmitry.
Very competitive.
A question as to whether or not Father Time is finally caught up to Artur Beterbiev on the heels of his first professional loss. And being honest, I don't agree with that. He didn't look dramatically different yesterday than he did in their initial meeting. He still looked just as dangerous. It's just yesterday Dmitry was better. Marginally better, but still better.
Proved me wrong.
I was happy for him. I was happy for him because I think as men, we can all share in this collective victory over his ex-wife.
That bitch.
You remember how she was rejoicing after the end of the first one? Trying to rub it in Dimitri's face.
That bitch.
That he lost, now he won. I don't imagine that right now she's beside herself with joy, beside herself with adulation for her ex-hubby.
It's not a good Sunday morning for Kate.
If you've been around, we've all had to deal with a Kate Bivol, a version of her, in our own way, that vindictive ex.
Go to hell, you bitch.
So even though he proved me wrong, I am happy for him, and Turkey El Sheikh has made it clear that he wants a trilogy. He wants there to be a third fight. Underneath it all in the build-up, we knew that this was a possibility, that if Dmitry wins the second one, we're going to get a third. I'm okay with that.
Both of these fights were so close and so tight. If any fight needed a trilogy, this one does.
But with 3 mandatory challengers already in the queue, already installed, it's conceivable that a third meeting may not be for Undisputed.
We'll talk more about it in another video.